Welcome everybody to another Sandler webinar. This is Break the Rules and Close More Sales. I am Mike Montague, your global head of content at Sandler, and Jeff Ney is one of our international Sandler trainers. He is director of training for the Sandler corporate team. That means he trains people all around the world in sales and leadership. And if you're not familiar with Sandler, that's basically what we do. We train over 30,000 people a year, and we help salespeople hit quota more often than any other sales training company out there. And a lot of people like it because it's non-traditional, and we'll talk about that a lot today. So what that means is we're going to break the rules, some of those traditional stereotypes around salespeople, and teach you how to work smarter instead of just working harder in sales. But there is one other thing you need to know before we get started, which is our founder, David Sandler, wrote the book, You Can't Teach a Kid to Ride a Bike at a Seminar. And what that means is the chances of you getting extremely improved sales results from hearing Jeff and I talk about it today for an hour is probably pretty slim. It's just like if a kid was hearing us talk about how to ride a bicycle. Well, it's great. You can learn some tips and tricks and get some awareness and some knowledge around what you can do differently. But what we can't get you to do is on the bike today here in the next hour. So it's up to you to take this information and apply it after today. Take a lot of notes, write down things you want to try, write down those scripts and questions you want to use, and then eventually you can work with Sandler Training to get to mastery. And that's what we help our clients do day in and day out all around the year, is improve their skills and get to a mastery level, ninja level sales results over time, but not in 1 hour webinar. So we got a special thank you for joining us today. If you go to sandler.com/small-business, you'll find some special offers there with additional sales resources to help you along in that process. And you can reach out and connect to a local trainer if that's something that you think would help you and your sales career or your sales team if you are a leader. So Jeff, my first question to you here is, what do you think people are commonly struggling with? We're talking about breaking the rules and closing the sales. What rules or bottlenecks are people getting hung up in that causes them so much trouble in sales?
You know, Mike, it's a great question to start with, because the word rule, I think, is probably one we ought to talk about. We see a lot of people who are operating really without any rules and without any process. And so now here we are, we're talking about breaking the rules. So there's not really an established process that people use to sell with. But I think for sure there are some, let's call them commonly accepted principles that salespeople, the world over believe in. And that's what I think we want to talk about today, which is, what are these things that we've come up believing about what should and should not happen in the sales interaction, and which of those things do we need to break tradition with in order to be better at selling, in order to get better results, right?
Yeah.
So,
and we want people to type those in too. So I forgot to mention that this question is for you watching. What are you struggling with in your sales process? What are some of your common problems? And Jeff, we know some of the usual ones, which is just chasing buyers, feeling like you're being too pushy, getting stalls and objections over price. And right. I think right now, especially in 2020, we have a lot of problems around getting a hold of people or being interruptive, or people just saying they're too busy, and a lot of other objections. Is there anything else that comes to mind?
I think in addition to all those things, there is a big problem that certainly not everyone has it, but the problem is with this notion of as a salesperson, my relative level of importance with the buyer, right? So do I have the right to do certain things that would be good for me to do, that would help me do my job better, that would give me the level playing field that I seek? But many people feel compelled to not do those things. They feel restrained, and they hold themselves back from it.
Yeah, and we see that a lot, right? We call it subservientness, or they're not an equal business stature in that relationship. That the buyer or the customer says, jump, and you're supposed to say how high as a salesperson.
How
right?
high and how fast? When do you need to buy? Yep.
And you're not allowed to ask those questions like,
right.
well, are you sure jumping is the right thing to do and
Right.
stuff like that, that would actually help both parties throughout the process. And one of the reasons we see that is this traditional stereotype of the salesperson. So I know you and I have both done this exercise with thousands of people, but I
Yep.
want to do it here with everybody on the line. Type in the chat, what are some of the words you would use to describe a salesperson if the old password game, if you're trying to get somebody to guess salesperson in a buzzword or in the game password, and you had to give clues to make somebody guess the word salesperson, what are some of the words you would choose? And we're already seeing them come in here, Jeff. Pushy, cheesy,
Same.
slick,
Yep.
used cars, consultant is good. We do get good ones here from time to time too. What
Yep.
are other ones that you commonly hear?
So underhanded, liar. I mean, they're generally not very positive words. You know, they paint the sales profession as dodgy, as shifty, as manipulative, as tricky, right?
Yeah.
Fortunately, we, like you mentioned, we do get, we see it in the chat here, knowledgeable. We've got the word expert in the chat, so we do get some of that. And I think there's really there's a glimmer of hope in the fact that some people out there, would think that of the sales profession. But if you ask an outsider, you ask somebody who's not in sales, you're going to get these very negative stereotypes, which in truth are very unfair to the profession. There maybe is a tiny percentage of salespeople who are truly those things, but the vast majority of salespeople are not those things. They are honest, hardworking people. They want to help their clients. They want to put new and improved solutions for things out in front of people. But we get this kind of pushback all the time, right?
Yeah, and I think it creates a ton of problems. One stat that I found was extremely interesting. If you look at the research, there are more salespeople in the world than any other profession. So it's more common that people are in sales and doing some sort of sales thing than any else. It's also in one of the top 5 most hated professions with lawyers and politicians.
Yeah,
And that's ridiculous. That means a lot of people even hate their own profession.
that's right.
That we think, okay, we're different, or we don't want to be that stereotypical salesperson, but we realize that that's what they're out there. We think that's what we should be in order to be successful. And we found that just not to be true, right?
Yeah, absolutely agree. I was on a session yesterday with a client of ours with managers, and one of the managers actually said, he said, I have to admit, I'm a person who doesn't like dealing with salespeople. I have to imagine that's impeding my ability to do my job well. And I thought, well, of course it is, right?
Yeah.
So, we don't want the sales profession to be seen this way, obviously. And we don't believe it needs to be, and we don't believe it should be. And we believe the vast majority of you don't see yourselves that way either. Okay.
Right.
So we've got here on the screen a statement that I think is really impactful, right? In sales, we know that, if you've been in sales any length of time, you know that you go out, you see a potential customer, you talk about something that you could offer them, and you start communicating about what you could offer, pricing details, etc. And that's when we get these things that we call stalls, roadblocks, and objections. Okay, it's very common in the sales profession. You'll hear it, stalls and objections, etc. Right? Well, where do those come from? Have we ever really thought about what actually is causing those roadblocks, right? Because it doesn't make sense, does it, Mike? If I'm in the market for a particular kind of product, I don't know, let's call it a big screen TV, right? A 60-inch, right?
Sure.
LED. Would I be repelling salespeople if I really truly wanted to buy that product? It doesn't really make a lot of sense, but yet we see it every day, right? We ourselves might actually do that if we are shopping for it and we go into a store and actually look for it. So the question we want to ask is, well, where are these objections and these stalls coming from? What's happening that causes this to occur, right? And what we're saying here is we're saying, hey, all these problems that we're encountering, these roadblocks, stalls, and objections, these are evolving from the way that you are interacting with this buyer. They're not really necessarily tied to some element of your product or service, okay? And I want to let that statement sink in for a minute. And the reason we've highlighted, right, interacting with the buyer is because that's what we want to examine today is how are we interacting with the buyer? What might we be doing that's actually causing some of these things to occur?
Well, and I'll chime in with one of the first ones, and then we'll talk about what these steps are and why they happen. But one of my all-time favorite Sandler lines is selling stuff that people want, have the budget to pay for, and have the decision-making authority to say yes on is not cheating. That's the way sales should be, right?
Could be, yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wouldn't all of you out there love it if all of the sales that you were going to close were with people who wanted or needed what you had to offer? They had the budget for it and they were willing to expend that budget to acquire it. Doesn't mean it, from you, but they were willing and able to acquire it. And there was a decision-making process that was clear to you and that you felt like you had a fair chance in. Wouldn't we love if we could have opportunities like that just lined up one behind the other? That'd be great, right?
Yeah, so let's talk about what happens instead, or what happens in a typical sales process. So again, this is a challenge for you. Type in the chat what you think the order would be on these traditional sales steps. So when people go out there to sell, or picture, maybe some of you are people just out of college, they get their first sales job, how they think that they should sell if they were doing a traditional sales role. If they didn't know any better just from watching TV and movies and interacting with salespeople, what do you think the steps would be in the typical sales order? And we got handling objections, needs analysis, follow up, close, and present. I'm going to take those down and ask Jeff for the answers here, but I'll give you just a couple more seconds. Any thoughts here on the setup, Jeff?
And Mike, just important to note that what you're seeing here are the steps that we've just broken the steps in the process down to 5. These are listed out of order. So what we're asking you to do is we're asking you to think, okay, which of these steps occurs and in what order, all right? And what we're going to do is talk about what the order is. So this first one, most salespeople these days actually start by doing something we call a needs analysis, right? We need to figure out what it is that we're going to actually go and present to our prospect or to our buyer ultimately. Now, on the previous slide, you saw something called present. When we do this exercise in our trainings, and I've done this hundreds of times, we frequently will get people who think that, well, present is the first step. And it may be true that there are some people out there who are simply presenting something right off the bat, but we would say that, most people, if you really think about it, most people are doing some sort of needs analysis before presenting. Okay, we're not talking about marketing. So we're not talking about those emails that show up in your inbox unsolicited that say, I have a voice over IP phone system for you, or I have an insurance product for you, et cetera, et cetera. Certainly not to denigrate those industries, but we're talking about a sales engagement where the salesperson needs to interact with the buyer and they both want that interaction to occur. So the first step that the salesperson is going to do is to figure out what it is you're talking about, right? Then they're going to present something. So they're going to go figure out what they need to propose. They might go back to their office and work up an actual proposal or a presentation, and then they're going to put that out in front of the buyer. Now, when they finish with that presentation, they're going to take a certain step. And here's a question. Let's pretend there's a room like for those people on the call today who actually go into rooms and maybe put a PowerPoint up on a screen in front of a bunch of people seated at a table, right? When you do that in person, or you might even do it virtually. When you are finished with the presentation, you've clicked through all the slides on your deck, you've answered all the questions that have come, during the conversation, and you're on the last slide, what do you do next? Well, most people in sales are going to ask a question, something like, okay, what do you think? Or how does this feel to you? Would this fit for you? Do you think this will work for you, right? What is that? What is that?
That's the close.
It's a close. It's an attempt to close. And that's why it says they're close or attempt to close. So I'm going to ask some kind of a question to try to obtain some sort of buying signal from the buying party as to whether or not they want to proceed. Now, after I do that, that's when the objections come out. So if I say, what do you think? Is this something that looks good enough to move forward on? That's when typically you'll hear things like, well, we need to really talk this through with a few other stakeholders, or yeah, there's a person who's involved in our decision process who's not able to be here today. We're gonna have to run this by them. this is something we're looking at with several different vendors, et cetera, et cetera. So good salespeople got trained in sales training if they went through formalized sales training, or if they just learned it, the school of hard knocks, they're going to try to handle or overcome that objection. But sometimes they can't do that. The buyer actually plays a card that the seller can't beat, right? And we get put into this follow-up phase. Now, I want to talk about this follow-up phase for a minute, because let's define what we think follow-up means, so we're both on the same page.
Mm-hmm.
Follow-up is when I've been sent away, so they have all my information. I've given them everything: pricing, delivery schedules, construction of the assembly of the different elements of the proposal. So they have all that. And I tried to handle the objections. I couldn't, so they've sent me away. They said, Jeff, it's really good. It's pretty complex. We just want some time to think through it. Would you reach out to us in a week or so? So if today we're Tuesday, next Tuesday, I reach back out to this customer and I say, hey, I might ring them on the phone first, right? Now, Mike, if I'm calling one of the people who was at that meeting a week after the meeting, what's the chance you think they're answering that phone call?
They might answer, but the chances of them saying, oh, hey, great, glad you called. I was just getting ready to call you and send you a check is probably very slim. Right?
It's very low, right? So I'm probably going to get a lot of voicemail. So I'm going to make a phone call, and a large portion of the time I'll get a voicemail, and then I'm going to leave a message. And the message will sound something like, hi, Dan, it's Jeff Ney over here at Sandler. We had a really good meeting last week. You asked me to follow back up with you in a week. So I'm calling to catch up with you today to see how your conversations went about our discussion last week. I'm going to be around all day. Here's my number. I'd welcome your call. And then I hang up. Now, do they return my voicemail?
No.
No, they don't. Okay. So what do? Well, I sit down at my keyboard and I start tapping out an email. And my email has to say something different than the voicemail said, right? Otherwise, it's a duplicate effort. So the question that I always ask the groups when I do this exercise live is I ask, how long do you think that email takes to create? And the answers range from 30 seconds to hours. And I want to suggest to you that these emails actually take a lot longer to write than we think they do. So we might think, oh, come on, it's a 3-line email, it's a 6-line email, it's a 2-paragraph email. How long can it take? Here's how long it can take. I sit down and I start writing, and I'm typing the sentence, and I realize the word I just typed is not quite right. So I have to backspace, right? What word should I use there? Oh yeah, so then I type the different word. My point is, I've got to massage the message in this email because in my mind, I know something is wrong. I got sent away from this meeting a week ago and I put my best stuff forward, right? I gave them my best stuff and they still told me, Jeff, this is very interesting. Why don't you give us a week and contact us again? So now my brain subconsciously, if not consciously, knows there's a problem. I'm putting a lot of effort into making this email do the job I hope would have been done last week. So I send it. Now, Mike, do they respond to my email right away?
Not typically, no.
Not typically, right? So now I get treated to the same process again, either tomorrow or the day after. And that's a decision point I have to make is how soon is too soon? If I do it too soon, I'm desperate. But if I wait too long, then I don't care. So I'm threading the needle. I'm going to wait one day. So it was Tuesday when I did all this emailing and phone. I wait Wednesday off, and then Thursday I repeat it. Here's what it looks like. I call and I email, and I call and I email, and I have this spiral that it spirals inward until I reach a point where I give up and I trail off down past the bottom of your screen.
Yeah.
If I had a pen and I were drawing on the slides right now, I would label that the red spiral of death, right? These calls and emails, calls and emails, calls and emails, they end when I get tired. Here's what I want you to notice. This follow-up stage, while it seems innocuous with that little label, this is the place you actually end up expending all of your emotional energy, and you start to question things like, why am I in this profession? Does my company actually have the right product set for the competitive market that I'm in? Is our pricing in line with the market, or are we crazy high? All these questions, they take root in my head. And none of those things is good for me as a salesperson.
Well, you know what? It's interesting that you just said good for me because I've noticed a thing in my life that things that are good for you kind of stink at the beginning and they get better over time, like working out or eating right. It's tough to get into those habits,
Yeah,
but if you continue that, it's great. Things that are bad from you are easy to start and then they get worse and they spiral downwards, like you were talking about as you go
yep,
along. And when I look at these 5 steps, I see the same thing. Like for salespeople, the needs analysis is fun, presenting is fun, closing starts to get a little more difficult, handling objections a little more difficult. And then, like you said, follow up is
yeah,
the voicemail jail we all hate. And
yep,
so the further this process goes along, the worse and harder it becomes. And so I don't want to spend too much time on it because this is the what not to do
yep,
portion, people. So don't take heavy notes on these 5 steps.
right,
We're going to give
right.
you some steps to do. But here is the thing that I think, unless people have done Sandler training, they have not considered yet, is that the buyers also have a stereotypical way to buy. That if you're, thinking you're supposed to go shop for a major purchase, you're going to do these 5 things as well. And so we're going to give you the challenge again to type in the chat: avoid commitment, express interest, obtain information, disappear, or act motivated. What order would you do those in? It's another puzzle to unwind. Thoughts on these steps, and we'll leave this on the screen here before we give the answer,
Yep.
just so people can type them in.
Again, just important to note, as you think about these 5 steps on the screen, imagine a situation where the buyer wants to have the conversation with you. So the buyer's not trying to hide from you, okay? They actually want to interact with you. And when you think about that kind of buyer, and Mike, you said it well, they actually have a system that they're using to interact with the salesperson, right? Whether they got formally trained on it or not, they sort of realize there's a way that you can interact with salespeople that benefits them. And I don't think they're out to hurt salespeople. They just don't think much about what their actions do to salespeople. So they think, this is the way I like to do it. I'm busy, I've got things to do. Let me interact with a salesperson in this specific way. So the first thing that a buyer will typically do is they're going to express some kind of interest. That could be they fill out a web form, right? They might respond to an email campaign. They might respond to a piece of advertising outdoors, right? Billboards or signs in public transport or whatever. They might actually call a salesperson. They might email a salesperson directly. All of those things are basically expressions of interest. They're just saying, hey, I am interested in talking with you about what you sell. Now, the pitfall here for sellers is we mistake sometimes this expression of interest as a buying signal.
Right.
The buyer didn't say they were going to buy this thing. All they said was, I would like to talk with you about this thing, right? And I really think that's important for us to keep in mind.
Yeah.
Once they've done that, right? Now, if they really want our attention, they've learned that the best way to really get the attention of a salesperson and to keep their attention and to get the best value from a salesperson is to make that salesperson feel like there is a real opportunity at play. Right, Mike?
Right. Yeah. You got a live one here. Wake up,
You got a live
salesperson.
one.
Pay attention to me. Yeah.
That's right. Okay. And it works because salespeople are smart, right? You all are smart. You know when somebody's just fishing for a price and they're not really serious, they just want to see what you have. You know the difference between that and a person who really is an interested buyer. So buyers have kind of learned that the best way to do that is to give you some indication that they're actually motivated. It might be so overt that they would say, hey, Mike, we have to acquire a solution for our accounting system. The old one is killing us. You guys come highly regarded. We're really interested in speaking with you. Okay, it could be that overt, or it could be a little less overt, but in whatever way they're doing it, they are giving you this impression that they are highly motivated to do something. Now, what they want from us, of course, is information. There's a ton of, let's talk about this for a second. There's a ton of information on the internet. Everyone knows that. Okay, so what kind of information are we talking about here? We're talking about the information that they cannot get from a website.
Yeah.
There are some things that all the information you need is online, it's on the website. But for a lot of people who are out there in sales today, the things they sell are they're more complicated than that. They're more complex than that. And you just can't get everything you need from the site. You can get a lot, but you can't get everything. So if you ever clicked over to a website and you go, you want to check and see like what the pricing is, there is no pricing tab, right, on some websites, or on the websites where there is one, the customized version or the enterprise version or the corporate version, it will say something like, call for pricing, or click here for pricing, right? So that's the information we're speaking of here. But their process, these 3 steps so far, they said, hey, I'm interested in talking with you about what you sell. They express some degree of motivation to get you into the game, and then you're primed to give the information that they're looking for, right? Which, Mike, as you noted just a moment ago, it feels good to us to do that, doesn't it? Right?
Mm-hmm.
We feel like we're doing our job. Hey, I'm helping this customer, I'm helping this buyer, I'm helping this person out. Unfortunately, as soon as you've given up all the information that they want, they are in a position now to avoid committing to do anything further with you. And that's where, in my example, I said, they defer my conversation for a week. They said, get back to us in a week. So what I'm struggling with now is I'm struggling with somebody who actually is trying to avoid commitment from me, right? But in my mind, I'm hoping that they wanted to move forward with me because, again, they acted motivated. They gave me all the right signals, right? So they may be executing this avoid commitment step while I'm still thinking, hey, I got a live one, to use your your language. Their final step, if they don't intend to buy, or at least not right now, their final step is to disappear. Going back to that red spiral, it's easy for them to disappear because they can simply ignore all of our calls and emails. It's very simple to not answer the phone, and it's very simple to delete an email when you see it in your box. So their disappearing step is simply that. And what we've got on the screen right now is we have a display that shows how perfectly married these 2 systems are to each other. So if you start at the top, if you start with the buyer who expresses interest, right? The salesperson says, okay, let me go figure out what's going on. The buyer gives you a motivation, right? They let you know, hey, I'm in, which encourages you to go create that presentation or proposal and deliver it, meeting their need for the information they wanted. And then when you try to close, that's when their avoid commitment step jumps in. You try to handle the objections or the stalls as best you can. But if they play a card higher than one you have, then they're in the disappear mode, and now you're in follow-up. So here's a question that I always ask when we see this diagram. Where did we lose control of this situation? So Mike, maybe we can get people to put into chat, like, where did I want you to focus on the blue line only. If you can go back, there you go. Focus on the blue line only, put into chat, where did we lose control of this conversation, right? Because we can only control the blue line. I cannot control what the people do on the orange line. They're gonna do what they're gonna do. So we've got some things in the chat. We've got, I've seen needs analysis in the chat. I've seen close, yeah. And I've seen present and propose. So why is present or propose, in fact, the place where we lose control, right? Mike, yeah. What do you think? Why is that?
Well, I think that's when we give them what they're looking for without getting a commitment back to buy, because you and I know we call that unpaid consulting, right? That's where we gave up our cards. We showed them our cards and we didn't get them to show their cards at the same time.
Yep, that's right. That's right. It's like hopping in the old days, hopping in a taxi, getting out at the end of the ride and just running. I mean, that's what it's like. Okay. So if we lost control at the point where we presented and proposed, and there was all this other activity that we engage in afterwards, we have to ask ourselves a question. How big a favor are we doing for ourselves by executing the sales process in that manner? We call what you just saw the buyer-seller dance, right? There is an interplay between the buyer and the seller. And if you think about a classic ballroom dance, right? 2 parties enter the floor. When the music starts, there's always a lead, isn't there, Mike? One of those parties is leading. And what does the other party do when the lead starts? The other party
follow along,
follows, right? We know that's how it's supposed to go. Now, I want you all to think about how this plays out on your sales meetings. When you go out on a sales meeting and the customer, the buyer, asks you a question and you answer, who's leading the buyer-seller dance? Who's leading that interaction? Who's established the momentum? Who's controlling the discussion? Is it you or is it them, right? So that's really what we want to talk about, because we want you to be able to get out of that We want you to start selling in a way that will get you out of all of that so you can be in control, right?
Yeah, so we're
But
going to get switched to those solutions here in a second, but I wanted to encourage everybody watching to chime in the chat here. I'm going to ask you two tough questions. The first one is, what happens that's bad for you and bad for the buyer in that buyer-seller dance that we just outlined? Um, Jeff, I know we've seen a lot of things. Really, there's no mutual agreement. There's no working together on this. We have opposing parties trying to force their will here against each other. A lot of times we're guessing at our presentation because we haven't really understood or talked about the budget and things first. There's a lot of wasted time and effort and follow-up and trying to avoid follow-up and time and energy. And there's a lot of ghosting. I love we put that little skeleton icon on the disappear one.
yep,
Is we've
yep.
all been ghosted. So my second question for everybody is, in the last 12 months, approximately how much has that buyer seller dance cost you? Your sales problems and challenges, the amount of people that have ghosted you after you've talked with them for a while versus you mutually deciding not to go further, or the ones that you've won. If you added all your time, energy, efforts, the lost revenue, lost time prospecting for new sales that would have been better, like we talked earlier, that have paying a reason to buy from you, have the money, have the decision-making power. If you added up all of those opportunities, how much has that cost you? And one final thought here is, think about in baseball. I love the baseball analogy here, Jeff, is a major league Hall of Famer hits over 300. A person average or it gets relegated to the minors about 250. That's one more hit per 20 attempts is the only difference between Hall of Famers and people that don't make it in baseball. Is the same thing true in sales? Where if you just got one more per 20 attempts, what would that do to your commission check, to your overall revenue, to your ongoing business? Would that allow you to survive this pandemic in 2020? If you got one more out of 20 than what you're currently getting, what would that be worth to you? And Jeff, I'll give you a couple of chances to comment there on those two questions. What are some of the common problems and where do you see these payoffs happening for us?
Well, I mean, clearly problems, that we face when the buyer's in control is we literally don't understand what they need. We think we do, but we don't, right? So, and what I mean by that is they might be asking us for certain solutions. We then go out and propose solutions to what they've requested, but we don't know because they don't know if that's the solution they really need, right? So we end up hunting down the wrong path and we end up proposing stuff that isn't really going to solve their problem or their challenge, really isn't going to help them. And that's where things get stuck at the end, because when they evaluate the solution that's proposed, they themselves realize, you know what, this isn't really going to do it. So there was all that effort that we spent, which is now wasted because we started in the wrong place. So I think that's really a key for all of us to understand is we really need to understand what they need. And the key is, they don't always know what they need, right? Just because they sound confident about it doesn't mean that they really know what's best for them. You might have expertise that they're not aware of. You might know things about industry trends or certain capabilities of different products that they're simply not aware of or haven't thought of, right?
Yeah.
So that's certainly one thing.
And one more question here for everybody else, and we'll jump into the solutions and how David Sandler came up with the solutions to these problems and how we've been teaching it for the last 50 years to people. It's literally over 1 million salespeople, Jeff. And I know we put this question in here on purpose because both you and I have seen it. Whenever you tell somebody the answer to their problems, 90% of the time you get a yeah, but response. So my question for you here, again, as a participant in the webinar, on a scale of 1 to 10, how committed to you are you at eliminating these sales challenges? If we gave you the answer, would you actually go apply it? Or would you give us a yeah, but excuse or make up some other reason? Because some of the things we're going to ask you to do are really easy and other ones are going to be a little uncomfortable, but all of it is going to feel a little weird at the beginning, right? Because it's something that you're not used to doing. It's not what stereotypical salespeople do. it's something that you haven't learned how to do up until this point. So it's a new process for you. And one thing we found here is that if you put anything in the chat below a 10, I got a challenge for you. Pick up your pen or mouse on your keyboard at a 9 commitment level and see how much action takes place,
Yeah.
right?
Yep, that's right.
Unfortunately, anything other than 10 was the wrong answer. What would you add here, Jeff?
Yeah, no, I think that's right. It's, we understand it's difficult to think about these challenges because you are probably thinking, gosh, I might have to learn a whole new way of doing things. I might have to do things I'm not comfortable doing. So it makes sense that not everyone's going to rate themselves a 10 there. It makes total sense. I guess the simple challenge of picking up your mouse at a 9 commitment level illustrates the point that you either do or you don't. Now, here's the good news. The good news is that all these things that Sandler talks about doing, you need not be afraid of, because what we're going to show you here next is that we're going to talk about how empowering Sandler is for you, and that empowerment will excite you and it will compel you to want to make these changes, okay? Because this is some big news for people who've been in sales forever and ever. I had been in selling for 14 years before I came to Sandler. It was like, that there was a commercial for a certain allergy medicine where it's hazy before the medicine is taken and then everything is clear. That's what Sandler is, right? Sandler clarifies things for you and it empowers you in a big way. So Sandler philosophy is, hey, we have this philosophy that says salespeople are professionals, right? Would the buyers that you go out to who treat you to the call me in 2 weeks, just send me a proposal, don't come by, do you think they treat their attorney that way? Do you think they treat their physician that way? Do you think they treat one of their trusted advisors that way? Of course not, right? Salespeople are professionals and have the right to be treated as professionals. And all we have to do is we have to learn how to assert that right. But it starts with the belief, Mike, in my head that I'm a professional and I deserve to be treated like one. And that'll straighten up your own internal backbone, if not your actual physiological backbone, that people can see the difference. So that's one of our philosophies, and it's a big one. Another one, these buyers out there, by the way, when we use the term buyer, we don't mean the purchasing agent. We mean any person who you might be speaking with as a potential customer, right?
Right.
The buyer has to qualify for your time. They have to qualify for your time. Not every buyer deserves your time, right? I think actually car sales people are probably pretty good at this. They probably have a good sixth sense about who's serious and who's not. And they don't have that many opportunities in a day to make a sale. So they're probably not going to spend too long with people who are just there, doing the literal kick tires thing. So buyers have to qualify for our time and our attention. Next, we believe our philosophy is that developing an opportunity has to be done in a systematic manner, right? You need to use a system that will help ensure you don't get on the wrong side of that buyer-seller dance that we showed you a few slides back, right? That system guides you in terms of what you say, not by script, but in terms of what you say at certain times. So what kind of things you should be talking about at what points during the sales conversation, right? And it's repeatable. So you can go back later and you can debrief yourself on a sales call you went on and ask yourself, where did this fall down? Where did I fall flat? Let's see. There are buyers. We have to be okay with the notion that there are some buyers out there who will not qualify for my time. So that, I think, Mike, that's a big one, right? Don't we see plenty of people who believe I've got to give 110% to every single person who asks me for any kind of interaction, right? That's not true. You get to decide, right? You're the one who gets to qualify the buyer, and you get to decide who you want to work with and who you don't. Now, you should do it with a set of metrics. You should be smart about it. Let's evaluate opportunities, well, but you get to decide, right? Let's talk about stalls and objections. Stalls and objections really should not be part of the buying process. It should not be part of the sales pursuit process, right? And what we mean by that is you should not be blindsided by stalls and objections. So when we work with people, we show them how to get stalls and objections on the table early so we can deal with them early. If they're going to be a real objection that cannot be overcome, that's okay. I just want to know about it soon. I don't want to wait until I've done a bunch of work and then find out that I have this big objection, because I should have found out, 2 meetings ago that I have this big objection, all right? how do you control the sales process? Well, it's the function of asking the right questions at the right time of the right people. So can you do that, right? Are you able to know what questions to ask, to whom you should ask them, and when they should be asked? We've got to make sure we have the questions down. We need to know what questions are going to be most impactful. We need to know what information we're looking for, right? And here's a hint. It's not just the information about give me all the specs on this project so I can go back and quote it. It's information that pertains to their motivation for engaging in the project in the first place, information about whether they've tried anything to solve their problem previously, information about how well those attempted solutions had worked, etc. So there's a lot beneath the surface there. And then finally, there should be both a start and a finish to every selling opportunity. And guess who gets to decide who decides when the thing is over? It's you, right? You're the one who's qualifying the opportunity. You are using a set of metrics to do so. And you're the one who gets to decide when the game is over, because we don't want you to be strung along by these prospects. It happened to me for 14 years. Mike, I don't know what your experience is prior to Sandler. I did the whole thing, right? I presented to everybody. I remember sitting at my dining room table at 1 in the morning, typing out presentations, right, for the next morning at 8 a.m. I did that for more than a decade. I got to tell you, this is way easier and it's way more fun. It's way more fun.
Yeah, and I'd add two things to that. One is what you said about the qualification. I think most people think that sales is won by the person who takes the most swings. You know, if we go back to our baseball analogy, swinging the bat doesn't help you get a better batting average. If you swing at every pitch, you're going to swing at some in the dirt, curveballs, right, stuff that you're going to miss. So being choosy helps you increase your batting average. Same thing's true in sales. Working harder and making more calls doesn't solve your problem, because you end up wasting time with more unqualified people. However, being choosy does. So could you imagine, and this is the second thing that I think about all the time, could you imagine actually doing less work but making more sales? Because that is possible. We all know the top salesperson in our company is not the one running themselves ragged, not sleeping at night, doing all the crazy stuff. They're the ones playing golf, you know, on Friday. They're taking the fun plane trips, taking vacations, and they're enjoying life because they're working on the right end of the problem, right?
They're the ones we look at and we say, you know what? They have the best territory. They have the best clients. Their clients buy the most stuff. It's just not fair. Well, in reality, they might just be working smart, right?
Yeah.
So what is our role then as the salesperson? What is our role in this whole thing? And the role for us is to create this environment where the customer feels free to buy, right? And we stay out of the way. So don't we all love to buy stuff? I mean, I think we all love to buy stuff, right? What we don't like is when we start to feel like we're being pressured by salespeople to buy certain stuff or to act in a certain way. So a smart salesperson knows that and says, I'm going to stay out of the way, but I'm going to ask the right questions to get the buyer to think the right way so that they go towards the solution that I want them to go towards, because I know it's the best solution for them.
Yeah, and that's huge. I was going to chime in on the questions thing too that we mentioned in the philosophies. I love this because, again, it's counterintuitive. So we're talking about breaking the rules today. The person who is talking the most feels like they're winning the conversation internally, but the person who is talking the least is actually winning and controlling the conversation, because they're the one asking questions, directing the conversation, and they're the ones getting information. So while it may feel good to be spilling all of your information and be the one talking, it releases endorphins in your body. You're actually losing your mission to accomplish the objective.
And I would say, to build on that, Mike, I would say that asking questions, so it might take you 10 seconds to ask a question, and then you're going to get 2 minutes of response from your customer, from your buyer, right? The endorphins that you will get when things start coming out of their mouth, which tell you how to sell them. They will tell you how to sell them if you ask the right questions. Once you learn how to do this, it's a pretty amazing process. These people that told you they only had 30 minutes for you, you'll be sitting in their office, it's coming up on 30 minutes, and you'll say, you know, Mr. Customer, I just want to let you know we're getting close to that 30-minute time frame. They go, oh, I got time, no problem. And they keep talking, right? That's how you know you're doing it well. People will spend time on things they believe are valuable for their business. And that's the root of the importance of that questioning thing. Is we've got to be good at that, because people want to talk just like people want to buy. Our role is to create the atmosphere where they can do both.
I love that. And that means it's not hard selling. It's not forcing your way into it. It's not pressuring anybody to buy. It's actually removing pressure and obstacles
That's
from
right.
their buying process. And so we talked about the sales steps, 5 for the buyer and 5 for the seller earlier. Here are the 7 steps of the Sandler submarine system. Give us a quick overview, and then we'll spend a couple of minutes in each section as we go through here and talk about really how we do this differently and stay out of that buyer system.
Yep, sure thing. So we're going to start at number 1, obviously, and go all the way around through number 7. So at number 1, we're saying this is a place where we are building bonding and rapport with our buyer, right? So what is bonding and rapport? It's generating relationship. It's building a relationship. It's creating a connection between the buyer and yourself, right? Now, most salespeople with experience in the profession, of course, have done this for a long time. What we really want to understand, though, is what science is behind this. What actual scientific concepts can we use to improve our chances of creating a stronger relationship, right? Because the stereotypical salesperson that shows up and asks about the weekend and asks about they point to the picture on the person's desk and they'll say, oh, you have a beautiful family, ma'am. People know that's not genuine, right? So we've got to be genuine. We've got to create good, true bonding and rapport, something that both parties will find valuable, right? And so that's the first stage in our process. Is let's do that. Let's understand how to do that, and then let's do that. Even though it shows as number 1, and then we move on to numbers 2 through 7, that never really stops. So we're beginning the process here, and we're going to, of course, attend to it all the way around the circle. But that really is the starting place. You've got to start with the relationship. You've heard it a million times. Relationships matter, okay? So that's stage 1. Step 2. Step 2, we're gonna do something that we call creating an upfront contract. Now, this has nothing to do with a legal agreement. We're not signing, papers, and there's no lawyers and stuff like that. The upfront contract is an agreement between you and your buyer about what will and what will not happen during this conversation that you're going to have today, right? So we'll define the agenda items. We'll also make sure we both agree on the purpose of the conversation. We'll even, at the beginning of the meeting, we'll even include a little bit of a discussion about, hey, what decisions do we want to make at the end of today, right? So, Miss Buyer, at the end of this hour that we're going to spend together, what would you like to have accomplished? And what decision should we make at the end of today? Because frankly, the decision can be that we don't proceed any further, right? Mm-hmm. And when you let people know that, when you actually tell them it's okay, that they can call a stop to things at the end of today, they relax, and your conversations take on a completely different air, a completely different atmosphere, right? So that's our second step. Now, the third step, we call it pain. No doubt most of you have heard about this concept called pain, right? Pain, what problems do we have and how can we solve them? Well, there are actually 3 or 4 different facets of pain. So we want to explore all the facets of pain, and we want to make sure we understand, again, why are they engaging in this conversation with me, right? What's motivating them to look for a solution to that issue that they told us they had, or what's motivating them to seek the kind of product that we sell? It's really important that we understand what that motivation is and how strong it is. If it's a strong motivation and it has a real purpose behind it, aren't my chances of making a sale dramatically increased compared to something where there's very little motivation and there's not much of a reason behind it? It's just general interest. Again, this is one of the places where I get to decide, is this something I want to spend my time on? So that pain step number 3 is really important, right? And we want to make sure that we get good pain, we have a good understanding before we go on to step number 4. Step 4 is labeled budget. And budget is really the place where you're finding from them some rough idea of what sort of budget they have and would be willing to invest to deal with the issues that you've been talking about, right? So we want them to tell us a little bit about what their budget and what their willingness to expend that amount of money might be. Of course, if they determine that, we have a valuable solution for them. And then step 5, we call it the decision-making process step. So I want to understand what their decision-making process is. How do they go about making the decisions on the kinds of things we're talking about? What sort of criteria are they going to use to make that decision? How will they actually determine which supplier, which partner to acquire it from? I want to understand all those things. And you'll notice something. Here we are in step 5. And what have I not done yet, Mike?
Presentation.
I haven't presented. Think back to the slide earlier where we showed presentation was step 2 in the salesperson system. They would do a needs analysis, come out and present. Well, here I am. I've now done 5 things and I still haven't presented. So our step 6, which we call fulfillment, that's where we're going to present our solution. I could argue that we have a lot more insight now into this buyer and what they need and the challenges and struggles they've had, and I can tailor my presentation much more tightly, much more strongly toward their particular issues, right? And when I present it, whether I'm doing that in written form or verbal form, I've got a lot more insight into why they're looking for what they're looking and the challenges they've had along the way. And then our final step, which we call the post-sell step. So the post-sell step has actually three different elements, 3 different purposes inside of it. But essentially, we want to make sure we set ourselves up for success. So this is pretty simply like what's going to happen after this, missed customer. Mm-hmm. I want to deal with the potential for buyer's remorse. And then I also want to talk about the upcoming conversation I'd like to have with them regarding referrals and introductions to other people who might similarly want things that I have provided to this customer. So that's our 7 steps. Mike?
Yeah, we're gonna break these down into the 3 parts, because sometimes I think 7 is overwhelming for people. We can't remember 7 things. If it's your first time hearing that, there was a lot to unpack. So yeah, we're gonna break it into 3 chunks and go a little bit deeper. We still got about 10 minutes here. So first thing I think is in building the relationship, when we look at these 2 together, Jeff, for me, it is making sure that we have trust here so that we get open and honest answers to the rest of what we're trying to accomplish. Because when you look in the grayed out section there, when we ask about what their real pain and their problems are and how they're feeling about their current situation, if we just jump into that and they don't know us from Adam, yeah, it doesn't feel right. So we need to do some things. And we're talking today about breaking the rules, which means we need to set these upfront contracts to change the game and change the rules. Otherwise, they're going to go into that buyer system. That's their default. So unless we tell them to do something different, they're going to go with the buyer system and try and steal our information, right?
That's right. That's right. So your point about trust is so good, Mike. It's the key word here. I think we all know that, but in reality, how do we go about creating trust? It has to go deeper than surface level. So we need more than this general likability between the salesperson and the buyer. Mm-hmm. And this is one of the words I want to pause and spend a little time on here, is liking, right? So a lot of people in sales think it's my job to get my buyer, my customer to like me, because if they like me, they're going to buy from me, right? Yeah. But there's a real danger in getting someone to like you. And the danger is simply that if you are trying to be liked, you're more susceptible to doing whatever somebody else asks you to do, right? Yeah. And that's going to get you in trouble, because that's the customer that you're desperate to be liked, or you're eager to be liked. But that customer then says, can you give me 3 references? And you're like, of course, I can do that. Can you give me some white papers? Could you put together 3 proposals with some different options in each, so I can just kind of take a look at a wide variety of scenarios that we might acquire? All of a sudden, you're doing all this work, and you're doing it because you're trying to be liked, and you're afraid if you don't do it, you won't be liked, and then you can't make the sale. I would actually argue your trust level is not increasing. What you're actually doing is you're actually creating a belief in your buyer's mind that you are a person who will produce information as requested, but I'm not sure you've gained anything in trust. And the reason I would say that is because you haven't yet demonstrated any great insights into their industry or into their company or into their world. You're just responding to the request that they're making. It probably feels good for them to ask and receive, but I would argue that it probably feels better for them to be challenged by a question that forces them to look in a different direction and question what they're doing. Now, they may return to the place that they started, but I at least like to get them to look over here first and have to return back to me. That's
Yeah.
trust, right?
And I think it's huge. If you just think about a spouse, right? Do you want a spouse that needs to be liked by you, or do you want a spouse that you trust and respect?
Yes.
And I think that goes same thing for true for any business partner as well. Then
Yep.
we move into qualifying the opportunity, and this is pain, budget, and decision. These are in order for a reason, right? Do we care how much money they have if they don't need what we're selling? Probably not. Do we care if they're the decision maker, if they don't have money or they don't have a
Right.
problem we can solve? No, probably not.
Right. Yep.
So these, and I think qualifying is the key word here, is you mentioned it earlier. This is where we get to choose, does this person have a motivating problem that we can solve? Is there a reason they need to do business with us? Do they have the time, money, and resources to solve that problem? And can they make a decision, or do they have a buying process that is something that's in our favor? And I think
Yep.
that's a really deep one too, that a
Yep.
lot of salespeople think they have to chase every opportunity, but they don't say, hey, is the way they're buying, if they're doing some weird reverse bid process and you have to keep lowering your price and lowering your price
Yeah.
until the person who races to the bottom fastest wins, you don't want to be first in that race, right?
No, of course. And so these three steps here help you determine whether or not you should continue spending your time. And as Mike said, they're in an order for a reason. So if you don't have somebody who's actually motivated to change their current situation, it doesn't matter how much money they have, and it doesn't matter what their decision process is. They're not going to make a decision to change. We know that people change because they feel pain. So that's
Mhm.
the first place we have to start. Then we'll do budget and decision-making process and assess those things.
And then when we get to closing the sale, when we actually present our solution to the problem, like you mentioned earlier, we can now present it exactly to the problem that they're feeling and seeing. We can solve it within their budget, and we present something that is consistent with how they make the decision, giving them everything they need to know in order to choose our organization.
Right.
Theoretically, we should win 100% of those,
I
right?
mean, pretty close, right? So we have a rule in our training that we use, and the rule is if you wait until the presentation to close the sale, you're putting too much pressure on your buyer and yourself. And I love that rule because it really sums up what we're saying here, which is you've actually been closing the sale as you've been qualifying. When we get to the presentation stage, we better have a really good shot. I'm not saying you're winning 100%, Mike's not saying that, but we should definitely be at the top of the pack, and this should be a real opportunity, and they should be able to sign and go because we've already checked the budget, we've checked the decision process, and we know they're motivated.
And we've had clients with 80+% closing ratios in proposal to close. And they do that by not doing proposals for people that they're
That's
going to
right.
lose,
You don't
right?
get 80% by swinging at a bunch of stuff. Nope.
Yeah, and realistically, things do change. You're not going to get 100, but again, selling people that have pain, budget, and decision is not cheating. That's the way
Not
it
cheating.
should be. It makes your life a lot easier. And then I love the post-sale step because this is another pattern breaker that nobody else in sales talks about. What happens after they say yes? That's the end result of every other sales book I've ever read. And we go one step further, which is if you take off and say thanks for the check and run to the to cash it as fast as
Yep.
possible, you're blowing all that trust you just had. And a
That's
lot of
right.
other things, crazy things happen. Plus, you don't hang in there and get referrals, and you don't build that relationship for ongoing repeat business. A lot of good things happen when we do the post-sale step. So if you want to learn more about this, I'm going to give you a link here in just 1 second, but I wanted to hit one last topic here. We got a couple of minutes left, Jeff. The other thing Sandler does differently is we work on the whole person and we stick with you long enough to see results. I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar that you can't teach a kid to ride a bike at a seminar. We teach people all year round to help them grow and improve, and not just by giving you tricks and techniques and these cool one-line closers and comebacks. That's not what we're talking about. What you can see here is we're talking about changing the way you think about sales, the way you act in a sales call, and those tools that you use. What would you add on our success triangles, Jeff?
Well, so really, let's talk about the word momentum, right? The word momentum, it indicates forward motion, and you can't have momentum consistently with just techniques. That's what we just talked about was techniques. Techniques are very important, You've got to have the skill to execute them, and you have the knowledge of what they are. And of course, we've shown you a system full of techniques to be executed at a certain point in time. What we're showing you here, though, is we're showing you a way to create success, and we're showing you a way to create momentum by combining your knowledge of techniques with attention to your attitude. So we've all heard about attitude, okay? Attitude either propels us or constrains us. It holds us back, right? And so we need to work on our attitude. And when we here at Sandler, we work with clients, we know that that's a critical part. We've got to examine people's belief systems. So we'll go back to the beginning. Why do I feel compelled to do everything that the buyer is asking me to do? Well, that's part of my belief system. As we've seen, it's a damaging one, but I've got to look at it. And then I've got to make sure I'm doing the right behaviors, doing the right activities. So I put all those three together. That's how we get to success.
So we want to encourage you to do it. Go out there, break the rules, close more sales. We promise you sales can be a fun career. It can be a respected profession, and it's a heck of a lot easier if you work on the right end of the problem. So jot down an attitude, a behavior, and a technique that you learned today and go take action on them. If you want more information about Sandler, you can go to sandler.com/small business, reach out to a local Sandler trainer. We also have a ton of cool resources for you at that link. So a couple of special offers, and there is a free access to the Sandler online platform, which has just thousands of best practices we've collected from around the world over the last 50 years. Answers to sales problems that you know you had, we've solved them. We work with over 1 million salespeople. Trust me, it's come up. We've heard about the pandemic. We've heard about people not taking meetings or their budgets cut. We have answers to those problems in Sandler Online. So go check it out, sandler.com/small business. Thanks for being here. Jeff, thanks for presenting today. I appreciate it.
Thank you. It was a good time. Good luck, everyone.
Good luck and good selling.